This 90-second summary sponsor special is provided to you by Main Street Insider.
This is Jeremy Kulish reporting for Main Street Insider. We're pleased to be here today with Congressman Raul Grijalva from Arizona's 7th District. Thank you, Congressman, for being here.
Thank you, and appreciate the opportunity to talk about a mechanism, the legislation that we have, right to rent, a mechanism to keep people in their homes, to make the banks, force the banks to renegotiate, which they're not doing at the rate they should be, and with the money they're receiving from the federal government to renegotiate these loans, the percentages are abysmal, and the foreclosure bubble is going to burst one more time, so the number of foreclosures is going to increase in this house. Keeps families in their homes, they're paying on it, it's not a free ride, they're paying rent at the value that the home is now at, not at the inflated value that it was, and it helps those neighborhoods. I think if you drive around neighborhoods across this country, but certainly in my state, the empty yards, the empty homes, the increased level of crime, vandalism, all those things add to the insecurity of a neighborhood. Families in the home, working, keeping their home and their families together, I think is a win-win for the financial institution and for the community.
Okay, and how badly has Arizona and your district in particular been hit by this crisis?
500,000 homes in foreclosure, and we're anticipating another bubble. And of those, the foreclosure rate is so high because the banks haven't actively participated in their mandate to renegotiate some of these mortgages with families. So the renegotiating rate is so low, and so no options are left. So what has that done? Level of homelessness has increased in the state. Level of vandalism and crime in some neighborhoods that are hit particularly hard by foreclosure has increased. And these down economic times, the unemployment rate is up, and that's added and aggravated the whole issue of being able to keep your home. So the legislation we have is an interim step, an important interim step that says, family, you can, by using this law, insist on the right to rent. And the holder of your loan and your mortgage has to abide by that law. The rate of rent will be commensurate with the value of the home. If the value has dropped, then that's what you're going to be paying. You have a 5-year period to do this. Within that period, the bank should renegotiate your mortgage with you, but you've given some stability to those families, you've given some stability to the neighborhoods, and in the long run, it helps the lending institution. We have endorsements for this legislation from very progressive economists to the American Enterprise Institute, which is not known for its liberal leanings when it comes to economics. They've both said this is a good way for the financial institution and for families to stay together.
Okay. But I know Fannie Mae has tried a similar thing over the past year. Has that been a success to the best of your knowledge? And if not, why?
Because it was too limited. And at the same time, Fannie Mae and its sister organization were going through the trauma that they were going through in terms of their own operation and some of the disclosures that came as a consequence of that. So that program didn't get a chance to seed and grow the way it should. But in the limited experience that it had, it was very, very successful. And why wasn't it more successful? I think because it was limited in scope. That was the only reason. And part of the idea is modeled on that experiment and that initiative that they had.
All right. Can you possibly explain a little more about the mechanism by which the enforcement of this provision would work? And say banks decide to just not bother with it and go ahead and move through the foreclosure process, what accountability mechanism is there?
Well, the accountability mechanism, I think, in the law is that there's a mandate that is homeowner that has owned this home before 2007, there's some longevity to it. With utilizing the law, you could as a mandate, you can make the bank abide by the conditions of the law. And the oversight is, it's a 5-year period. And in that oversight period, the bank has legal obligations to work with the homeowner on setting the rate, A. B, on working in a sincere way on the oversight part. The oversight part being renegotiating a mortgage commensurate with the value of the home. It's a win-win for foreclosures, flipping it, the speculation that's gone on around all these foreclosed homes have not added anything to the economy. In fact, it continues to be a drain. Keeping people active and upkeeping their homes for a 5-year period. Why, with this law mandating that you must provide them the right to rent their own home? That's the mechanism, and it's the force of law that moves this more than anything else. And the enforcement has to be backed up by the various federal agencies, whether it's the SEC on one side, whether it's HUD on the other side, but that's the enforcement capability. But the consumer would know that they could, in effect, say to the bank, I'm going to invoke this law because I want the right to rent, and then that process begins.
Okay. Is there any cost associated with this measure?
The way we see it, of course, there's a startup cost, okay? But the way we see it, the cost is more than made up in the savings that we're accruing and that the banks are accruing by the fact that there are still income and revenue coming in for that home rather than it just sitting there with nothing being paid. Taxes are still being paid. There's income coming toward that mortgage from the bank, from the renter at this point. So yeah, it's a wash. At best, it's a wash as the program matures.
Okay, so I want to go through a few of the major arguments opponents are making on this sort of thing, and I want to give you a chance to address those. The first is that many believe contracts are sacrosanct, and we can't force adjustments to those contracts in the middle of the game after they've already been agreed upon. And this would be basically tearing them up with a federal mandate. How would you react to that?
In a contract law and in a perfect world, I would agree with that. We're dealing with the extraordinary phenomena here, which is the housing crisis as a whole and the foreclosure crisis as a whole in this country, which requires us to use mechanisms that weren't available to us in the past. And I would also say that we have bankruptcy courts in this country, that the whole premise of that is that you're not able to pay, and the consequence of that is that a bankruptcy court becomes the arbitrator, both the value, what's owed, and how, if it's going to be repaid. One of the issues that we pushed as part of the stimulus package that didn't get approved and was resisted tremendously by the same critics of this law, the right to rent, was the cram down theory, that people should be able to go to bankruptcy court, bring the bank into the court, and let a third-party arbitrator, the court, decide what is the decision on that. That was resisted very much. I think this is an interim step between the cram down and full force foreclosure. And it's a 5-year period where this is not in perpetuity. It's a 5-year period, and within that 5-year period, the renter / previous homeowner and the holder of the mortgage, the bank, have an opportunity to work out a different financial arrangement.
Another major argument made by opponents is that it would create incentives for the struggling homeowners to simply stop paying their loans and default and walk away, thereby depressing the housing market and leading to a lot of the problems we're hoping to avoid.
Yeah, that's been one of the arguments that has been the most effective, quite honestly, in opposition to it, that we are aggravating the housing crisis as opposed to mitigating where it's at. I believe very strongly that that's right to rent does mitigate the housing crisis that we're in right now, because there is no alternative. It's a black and white situation. You either lose the home or you don't. And we're providing this middle ground. And in crafting the legislation, we didn't make it in perpetuity. We made it 5 years. The house had to have been purchased before 2007 when all this started to occur. So you kind of cut out the ability to speculate, and you cut out the ability, and those that have already stabilized in their homes are stabilized. It's this new bubble that's coming in, and everybody, every economist, everyone tracking all this housing knows that it's coming back in again. A new bubble is coming in, and so the precedent is also different because of the speculation that went into causing this housing crisis. The bundling of mortgages, the reselling and flipping of mortgages, the inflated value of homes, the prime rate mortgage, the bubble mortgage at the end that people couldn't afford, the way people were qualified for homes that shouldn't have been qualified for homes. All that added to it. So while this whole speculative market was growing and growing with no controls, it led to the situation we're in. So this measure is I think, quite moderate compared to other alternatives, which would be a complete government takeover of housing as we see it now. It still leaves the private sector in its role, and it provides the homeowner an opportunity to reclaim that property that they're on the verge of losing.
So what do you plan to do to advance this measure?
We're going to try to reach out more to not just to the opposition, but also reach out more to the business community. I think we can do a better job of getting neighborhood associations and people that care about quality of life issues behind the legislation, and fine-tune and sharpen the economic argument, and deal more effectively. We didn't deal as effectively as we should the first time around on the issue that you brought up very pointedly with your last question about, are you aggravating the housing crisis by creating an incentive not to pay? And how does right to rent deal with that issue? I think we need to be sharper and communicate that publicly much clearer than we did when we first initiated this.
All right. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No.
Great. Thank you very much.
For more information on this and other bills in front of Congress, go to mainstreetinsider.org.